Greetings. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is a special report less than a week ahead of the 2024 election. And of course, we're having a great deal of reported election fraud or improper behavior with ballots and people doing all sorts of nonsense, and it's only going to get worse. And if you think things are going to get easier after the election, I predict that won't be the case. But there's a lot more going on than just Americans, forgetting about how to be civil about one of their institutions, which is supposed to be the peaceful transfer of power. And this is about the good old First Amendment to our Constitution, freedom of speech. Freedom of religion and the press is in there too, but freedom of speech is something that we've always held dear, at least until recently. Other countries don't hold it dear. Now, originally this was going to be a Q&A, because some people were asking me if there are certain books I've read, controversial books. I'll go into that at another time, probably a special on banned books. But this is a report on the banning of Candace Owens from visiting Australia. Freedom of speech belongs to everybody, and it's designed for people who aren't necessarily the most popular. I have followed Ms. Owens for years, not closely. I mean, she's out there. I did correspond with her very briefly before she was famous. She was supposed to be going down to Australia for a speaking tour. This had been planned for several months, and at the last minute, her visa was pulled by the Australian government. Why is freedom of speech so important? Is it just the right thing to do, or is there a practical side to it? Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm not a fan of Australia. I've never had a desire to go there. I've been very unimpressed with Australian officials I've met over the years, and the fact that they surrendered their firearms and obey their government without question, and their government is quite tyrannical. Yes, it is. It's quite tyrannical. And in 1999, they had a chance to basically become a fully independent country free of the British Commonwealth, and they turned it down. I remember asking a Australian colleague at the time, why was that? And he told me, well, it wasn't a good enough deal. And what? A good enough deal to be independent? Could you imagine George Washington and company back in the day saying, nah, not a good enough deal if we want our independence? Made no sense. So I don't really hold Australia high in regard, never have. But they're basically, they're actually making things more difficult for themselves. And I did some research on Australia, but we're going to go into some other things first. And this is the practical side of freedom of speech. Back in 1990, I believe it was 1990, I got to attend a conference in the city of Sendai, Japan. And this is back before the internet really started. Okay, the internet was coming along. We were calling it the Matrix. This is back in the days of bulletin board services. Some of you may remember that. That's when you had a local computer hooked up to modems that went at the earth-shattering speed of 9600 baud or 19,200 baud. I mean, it was really primitive times compared to now. And if you wanted to send a message to somebody on the other side of the world, you would use an email reader of sorts, a message reader, upload a data file to a bulletin board, and once a day, that bulletin board, in the middle of the night when the phone rates are cheap, would call another bulletin board in the United States, maybe San Francisco, and it would go on. It would take about a week to get an email message to somebody on the East Coast from where I was in Japan. Oh, such innocent times. But we had a conference back then because the internet was starting to be talked about and ways computers were going to be networked. And there was a big conference in Sendai, Japan, and I was invited to attend. It was great. And we had a big meeting one night where all hands were there, all the people, all the players, the journalists, the The people that were running bulletin board services from around the world got together, and the topic of freedom of speech came up. Who should be allowed on these platforms, and should anybody be banned from them? And I don't remember everything. That was so many years ago. And what happened was it got pretty heated. People were thinking, no, we can't have real crazy people like Nazis and everybody spouting their junk. And we were talking about this in some detail. And then there was one man that stood up. I don't remember his name. I'm sure he's passed on by now. But he was a colonel in the Army in the Vietnam War. And he was based in Colorado, as I recall. And he ran a bulletin board service in Colorado. And he stood up and started telling us, he said, look, we've had the same sorts of problems. And you do not want to censor these people. The reason why is if you censor them, if you basically prevent them from speaking, they're going to go off somewhere else and do it. If you throw them out in front of everybody, it will be possible to prove their ideas to be invalid, and maybe you could even recover them. He was very eloquent in how he explained this. Because if ideas are really bad and you expose them to the sun, don't hide them in the shadows, they die on their own account. Bad ideas are just that. They're bad ideas. But if you show them to be bad ideas, they die. They go away. And although there was no formal policy that night that was formulated, everybody walked away saying, yeah, freedom of speech. You have to allow people to come out with bad ideas so they can be shot down in flames, and then we can move on to something better. How many people these days would go for slavery? Well, if we were never allowed to talk about it back in the day, would it have ever gone away? This is how the human process works. Some countries have actually learned this lesson and applied it very effectively. One is a country I lived in for many years, Japan. Now, back in the day, when there were many people left over from World War II, the ultra-rightists, the people that worship the emperor as a god, are very upset that they lost World War II, and they were at the time, well, they had money. So what they would do is they would put together these enormous buses and paint them black and armor them and hire a bunch of young thugs who were fanatical or just wanted the money. I think it was more of the latter. And they would stand around and on the top of their buses with Japanese flags flying, screaming about worshiping the emperor, getting rid of the American alliance and going back to reconquer. I mean, it was just nuts. But it was not suppressed. The Japanese police would stand around. The sound would be deafening. They would be way up there in the decibels. The police never did anything except contain them. You'd walk by and a cop would just smile and shrug his shoulders and said, yeah, that's what it's like, man, you know. They were basically ignored. They were a nuisance. They were a pain in the neck. They were laughed at. Their ideas were considered stupid by most Japanese. But they were not suppressed. They were not told not to say anything. They were not muzzled. And as I heard from a colleague in Japan before doing this report, he said they're just about gone. They were very prevalent back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe into the 90s, but they're gone. Their ideas proved to be ridiculous. But that wouldn't have happened had they been canceled. That wouldn't have happened if the police had gone in and cracked down on them all the time. They were basically just contained to make sure that they weren't going to get violent, because if something is pushed underground, it can get pretty violent. But no, they had freedom of speech in Japan. Really, and freedom of volume, take my word for it, it can get pretty deafening when those big black speakers were screaming about worshiping the emperor. But they're gone. They burn themselves out. As Mark Twain used to say, nothing survives being laughed at. Now, whether or not I agree with Ms. Owens on her particular viewpoints. I don't know what they all are. It doesn't matter. By putting her ideas out there, the general public will determine whether or not they're positive or negative, whether or not they agree or disagree. You have to give people the freedom to be wrong. I'm not saying she's right or wrong, or anyone else is right or wrong. But if you suppress something, you drive it underground, you instill on it a sense of fatalism and a sense of fanaticism. There's another bizarre thing to talk about these days, and that's people that believe the earth is flat. Even though I've met such people, I know such people, I don't associate with these people at this point, but they wouldn't look at reason. Even though I told them, yes, I've been in high-altitude aircraft, I've seen the curvature of the earth for myself, I've flown east to west literally 100 times, north to south. It's pretty obvious that the earth is round from my own firsthand experience. And basically 2,000 years we've known that it's been around, but it doesn't matter. They believe that. Now, I think that's crazy. However, if you drive that belief underground, because it is detrimental, it messes people up if they get to that level of ridiculousness. But if you drive that belief underground, you're going to find people who will not give up that belief. This is why freedom of speech and freedom of thought is so important, because people have to be given the space to be wrong and to be corrected. Australia is doing everything it can to repress people who do not like their open immigration policy, which is similar to the United States, their wokeism and all that other stuff. I was doing some research after Ms. Owens was canceled from going there. And she said she's going to fight this, by the way. I don't know how effective that will be. But I did some research, and there's it seems to be a good size, I don't know about large, but it seems to be a good size white nationalist movement down there that is quite literally Nazi. I'm not joking. These people are, big fans of Adolf Hitler and want to get rid of all brown people and everything like that, which, considering Ms. Owens is black, I'd be interesting to see why they would associate her with them. But we're not talking rational thought. We're talking about modern Western liberalism. But anyways, these people are growing. They have protests. They have what appear to be borderline violence right now. They wear black masks. They chant all sorts of nasty things. One of their leaders is somebody named Jacob Hersant, Hersant. I found out about him. I believe it's an organization called Europe Australia Movement. I think that's it. These are people that are real hardcore Hitler worshipers. But they didn't pop into existence overnight. These are people who, quite obviously, have been pushed into this corner. This is what happens when you don't allow people to express their views peaceably. You don't allow people to go out and come up and share their ideas. They're probably not good ideas, but if you push them underground, they're going to come out after you. The Japanese were so wise in dealing with their fanatics back in the day, they just went away. Occasionally, I'm told they might pop up here and there, but they're gone. So when you start pushing people into corners, you can't follow what they're doing. They're going to be fanatical. They're going to be very, very dangerous. That's the word to use. Now, Ms. Owens' beliefs, from what I can gather, are not very fanatical. Certainly not what you're seeing with these National Socialist movements down there. I'm really sick of the word Nazi, even when it's applied properly. But they decide not to let her there. Well, Australia doesn't value what we value in the United States. But the same sort of thing has been going on here as well. People have lost their jobs because of who they support politically or viewpoints or their religion. And people of all religions are being discriminated against. Just depends where you are. If you're a Muslim in the wrong place, a Christian in the wrong place, a pagan in the wrong place. a Buddhist in the wrong place, probably you're going to be on the receiving end of something. Tulsi Gabbard is a Hindu, by the way, for those of you who think that everybody in the U.S. government should be Christian. And she is quite a capable lady. And where we're at is this, folks. At no time in history, when people were silenced by force, by the authorities, by social pressure, do they go away. They go underground into the darkness, and they grow in strength. And the more fanatical their ideas, the stronger they seem to get. And this is happening again. And I think back to that cold winter day back in 1990, and it just, I'm trying to think of all the things that have happened since then to now, and if I could go back there and tell all my colleagues what was going to happen, I don't know, they would, a lot of them are not with us anymore, and they would be so upset because you can use things like the internet or newspapers or television to air ideas, and if they're good ideas, they survive. If they're bad ideas, they won't. You have to have faith in what the human race is capable of. That's it for today. If you appreciate these broadcasts, please like and subscribe, share with your friends, and at the same time, please consider a paid subscription. I can be reached at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. This podcast originates at Substack. Substack's address is aureliancolumn.substack.com. Thanks for listening. Until we meet again, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, clown world must be destroyed. Good day.